Good morning. Can you hear me okay out there? Okay. I'm just going to take a really quick moment to stretch. Please feel free to join me. We just got done with a nice break. That was really good. I got some more coffee in me. So I'd just like to thank each of you, and a special thank you to Vi for inviting me to this conference. What a huge, huge honor. I feel that's such a heavy honor that I feel kind of embarrassed. But I'm going to try to do my best for you. Thank you. I'm very, very honored to be sitting here with Kathy today. And I only recently learned about her work, and she is pretty amazing. To be sitting at the same table with her is a very big deal for me, so thank you. My name is Lisa Navrak Ellanna, and as Vi was telling you, I'm Inupiaq from Nome. My roots are from Kikiktaruk, Kotzebue, and from Uriwak, King Island. And I'm the granddaughter of Frank and Ursula Ellanna of King Island. So there's my traditional way in relating to you, and we always find ways in our culture to find relation with each other so that we can support each other and be there for each other. So knowing your kinship is important in our culture, and knowing who you're named after and how they relate to each other is also very important. It's just another way to support our families. So what I'm going to share in my presentation for my side of things here in this PowerPoint, I just want you to know that I'm going to go into some issues that are very sensitive and very heavy, and they carry a lot of emotional triggers for people. So everybody in this world is touched by some trauma and some difficulty. So I just want you to know, before we get into it, that this space here is a place of emotional safety. This is a sacred space that we've created, and we're sharing beautiful stories of our lives. And I just want you to know that if there's anybody in the room that's been trained or has the experience of sitting with somebody through difficult times, please raise your hand and being a support for people. Okay, you see in the room here, these are the support people, if you don't mind me voluntolding you to look to, for somebody to lean on if what we talk about today triggers anything in you and you feel the need to pull away and visit with somebody and just sit with somebody. So that's kind of a little bit of a disclaimer. As we move into this this discussion, it can get very, very heavy. So my apologies in advance. And I care for each of you, and I want you to feel supported. Okay, so this presentation that I'm going to give was developed over the course of several visits with Jim LaBelle, and we worked together along with other groups of people, the First Alaskans Institute Racial Equity Project, their staff, and also Panganga Pangawi, from originally from Savungo. She runs the wellness program over at Kawerak. We also have presented this several times together as well. But I just want to honor Jim LaBelle Sr. and his family for really being a strong voice on behalf of people who have experienced boarding school trauma in this country and across Canada even. So hats off to him. And I honor him and I lift him up and I thank him. Okay. So here is a definition of historical trauma from Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. And I'm sure many people are familiar with her name. She is the one of the individuals that pioneered understanding our history, and she was a clinician that worked with children of Holocaust survivors, and she could see the how similar what they were experiencing was to what Alaska Native American people were experiencing. So here are some of the effects of colonization on Alaska Native people, Native American people, probably Maori people, Aboriginals in Australia, all over the world. Indigenous people have experienced these things due to colonization, and I'm not going to go into each one of them. We're all pretty familiar with these effects. And just to let you know, my history was not taught to me as an Alaska Native person in school. I had to pay to learn my history. I had to pay for college classes to learn my history, which is a real point of disappointment, sadness, and anger for me. And it's the same for many, many Native people. So let's talk a little bit about the manifestations of all those things that colonization has kind of, how it's affected people here. We're talking today and yesterday in this conference about children's environmental health. Alaska Native youth have the highest rates, these are children under the age of 18, have the highest rates in the country for suicide. And that is a very huge children's environmental health issue for all of us to remember as well. And I could go into a whole nother presentation about that issue on its own. I'm sure all of us could, and we probably have, but I'm not going to go any farther on that. That is just one more children's environmental health issue we have to keep in mind in our service providing. So as I was growing up, before I went to college and learned about my history, I had no names for the struggles I was experiencing and witnessing in my life. I didn't have a name for seeing my relatives chronically inebriated, some of them, and some of them homeless, and the domestic violence that I was witnessing in my community. I didn't have words to describe what was happening. And through going to college and taking classes and meeting with experts like Jim LaBelle and other scholars on Alaska Native history, they gave name to me. They let me know there is such thing as historical trauma. What we're experiencing is a form of historical trauma. We have internalized the oppression, and a lot of us may feel less than in the eyes of certain, other cultures. So those are forms of internalized oppression. We talked a lot during our meetings about how Native people butt heads with other Native people sometimes, and he gave name to that too in one of the meetings. Jim said, well, that's lateralized violence. And I was reading a book by, a beautiful author from Canada. I can't remember her name for the life of me right now, forgive me. But in her book, she said that the nature of racism doesn't allow for the oppressed people to push back up against the systems, because every time they do, they are pushed back down. That's the nature of racism. It's a power relationship. So what happens is that pain and that trauma and the effects of those things get worked out laterally among the oppressed race, one against the other, race to race, the same race, because it cannot go up. So that's what I see a lot in my community as well, as lateralized violence. And that can take many forms. It can take the form of gossip, because we're trying to hold each other down. It can take the form of actual physical violence, many, many forms. So I was grateful to learn these words and give name to what I was seeing and living. I believe we're going to hear from somebody about the ACEs study, the ACE study down in California here shortly. I'm very, very grateful for this, for ACEs being on the forefront of public policy making and how we're servicing our community members as service providers, keeping that in mind when we provide services to our community members, that they may have gone through very difficult times. What they're experiencing now may be the manifestation of a lot of different traumas compounded over both their lifetime and previous lifetimes in their family line as well. So I'm grateful that, okay, I'll say it this way. I'm grateful that the Western Academy of Science has confirmed with their data what we know through common sense as human beings. Okay, I'll take that as an affirmative reaction. But it's funny, the Scientific Academy has to have these numbers and this data for things we intuitively and common sense-wise already know in our lives. And thank you for their hard work. I thank you for all your hard work in the field of science as well, and hats off to you, and I respect you for your work. But I just wanted to say that for Alaska Native people and Native American people specifically, for my community, I'll talk, ACEs is a wonderful tool to understand where people are right now. But it kind of, I think fails is a strong word. I'm just going to use it anyway because nothing else comes to mind. But it does not take into account cumulative injury and community and communal injury. Entire communities were wiped out in Alaska Native history through disease and famine. So after, due to and after contact. So we need to find a way, if we're going to look at wellness in the Alaska Native community and Native American community, to address that communal injury. There has been, Alaska Native and Native American people are very, and all indigenous people that I've read about are very, very communal people. Different value systems. The value of people in the family is more important than the individual. Individual gain is not something that comes first to mind. So looking at injury and historical trauma through the lens of communal and community and family rather than individual mental health or failure or, is very important as we move forward. So I just want to say that. There's some really exciting things going on out there in the scientific community when it comes to epigenetics. Very, very exciting. And I think Dr. Carpenter alluded to this yesterday as well, and thank you for that. There is in my community a sense of blood memory. And many Native American cultures have that belief as well, that we carry the memories and the experiences of our ancestors within us in our very bodies. And people in the Native American community have known this. It's part of who we are. And science is catching up. And somebody said that yesterday too. That was really awesome. Science is catching up. Excuse me. Epigenetics is these recent studies are showing that traumatic events and traumatic experiences several generations ago, activate or deactivate certain genes, which make us more prone to certain ways of life, certain illnesses, and certain viewpoints and perspectives and tendencies and attitudes. So I'm grateful that, again, science is... Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. catching up. Okay. You know, I have some, when I first learned about my history, I was so angry. I was so angry. And I started the mourning process. I started to grieve. And as we all know, as service providers, when we're administering to people who are experiencing grief, we know the signs of which stages they're going through. And they may hop from one stage to another, back to the other, back to another, and it's not lineal. So I got resentful when I heard presentations, Native people, my own Native people. I became angry when they told me that I have to heal. This is my process. This is my private experience in going through what I have learned, and my own processing of my pain is my own process. And for me, if I only learned about it in my late 30s, who else doesn't know? Who else doesn't know about our history? Who else is confused about why things are the way they are? Who else doesn't have that foundational understanding of the effects of contact and colonization and the missionary era and the boarding school era and loss of parenting knowledge and loss of language? And who else doesn't know? Who else doesn't have the words to describe what we're going through? So I became resentful. I was angry, and I pushed away the word resilience. There's some resentment towards that word in the Alaska Native community. And I was resentful for a while. And I thought, and Lucia Padicky, one of the great leaders in this field as well from our region, she's sitting in the very farthest back seat up there in the crowd. She's one of my teachers and my mentors, and I appreciate you, Lucy. Thank you. What she is able to do, I'm not at this point in my life. I'm not able to bridge my spirituality and my relationship to my Lord. I do believe in God, while exploring and taking a look at the very, very difficult things that happened to Alaska Native people during the missionary era. I'm still reconciling that, and maybe someday I'll be able to speak to that from a healthier place. So I'm not going to explore that right now. But my process is not something that somebody can dictate to me. They can't tell me to hurry up and heal. We talked about that. That happened. That's in the past. Let's heal. Let's move on. How dare you? You know? That's my feeling on it. We need, and Lucy has said this before in public places, or public speeches as well, that we need an acknowledgement. Alaska Native American people have heard small apology after small apology. But there needs to be a real national level concerted effort to address healing around historical happenings, all those traumas for Native American people, Alaska Native people. So here's some things we've done to begin our conversation. And again, this is a beginning. Nome Social Justice Task Force was created several years ago with the help of First Alaskans Institute to take a look at race in our community. As some of you may know, Nome is a very dichotomous community. It's about 50-50, pretty close to it anyway, non-Native and Native. And so there's been tensions historically in our community. And Alberta Skenk, who in 1943, I believe, 44, sat in the Dream Theater in Nome and refused to step out of her whites-only seat, and she was only 15 years old. And this is 20 years before the Civil Rights era or Civil Rights movement really took hold, the Civil Rights Act down in the southern states of America. So Nome is a real, there's racial tensions, and there's a lot of history around race relations in Nome. So these conversations were very difficult to have, but through training and how to host those conversations, we were able to do it, to start that conversation, as hard as it is. And we are nowhere near a comfort level around that issue, but we have begun the conversation. Another kind of prong to this approach in addressing racial inequity and social justice issues in our community. The Casey Family Foundation funded the University of Alaska Fairbanks and many other agencies to provide this Knowing Who You Are program. And it's an ethnicity awareness training program for foster parents. We have some of the highest rates of children in foster care, and we're grateful to the Casey Foundation for giving us the training to be able to make sure our foster parents provide for an environment that is allowing those children to maintain a strong ethnic identity no matter where they're from. We also address historical trauma and discrimination as a factor when we're doing all of our presentations around violence prevention, around suicide prevention, around teen leadership programs. We write it into our grants as well so that this conversation continues. So Jim LaBelle and our group over the past couple of years kind of conceptualized how to create a space for that conversation to happen. What do you do when you have a group of people in a room and you want to have a conversation about historical trauma or race relations or social justice? It can be a very, very hard conversation to have because there ends up being finger pointing and blaming and crying and super heightened emotions because everybody is affected by this in very fundamental ways. So here's what he and others in the group came up with. Making sure when you create that space that you allow for people to give them the words. Giving them the names for what they're going through is so pivotal. And it allows them to gain a new perspective on the whole issue. When I first learned about it, I was like, whoa, there is a reason why things are so bleep, 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 you know? And I walked taller. I felt stronger. I felt more proud. There were reasons why things were so kind of difficult. So allowing for that framework to be created, giving them names for what they're going through, allowing different genders to sit together because their life experiences, a group of men see things differently than a group of women, and their experiences around traumatic experiences related to colonization and race relations is different than it is for women. And creating a space also for young people to have a conversation too. And then bringing everybody back together and being stronger and feeling validated, you know, as a group. Of course, hopefully ending each conversation with what are our strengths? What do we know? There are a lot of things we don't know and that we're still in process of learning. But what are our strengths and where do we feel strong? What do we know? Blending approaches, Western and non-Western, making sure that those healing approaches include traditional ways of healing. And look at this beautiful site up here. Isn't that gorgeous? Look at that. I feel stronger just standing right here. These are our medicines. And I'm very, very grateful. Making sure that we know a lot of ceremony was kind of pulled away from Alaska Native people, Native American people. Those ceremonies were seen as savage or pagan or heathen. Some of the crazy words were used to describe some really beautiful ceremonies that helped us through mourning, grieving, cleansing, celebrating accomplishments, celebrating individuals, rites of passage for our children to signal that they are adults. Those kinds of things we don't have those anymore. So if we know of those kinds of ceremonies in our communities, we need to inject those into the process. So here's some really important considerations when you're starting conversations around this issue in your communities. Make sure that you have a safety net. Like I said earlier, for those people that are used to sitting with people going through a hard time, you are safety net people. Make sure that when you have this conversation around this issue, you have support people in place, because you can't just spill this stuff out there and then just leave people with no tools to be able to process through. It can be very, very dangerous to do that, because these conversations trigger so much, so many memories for people. And always keep in mind, not everybody's ready. Denial can be a beautiful survival mechanism, and allow that. It's okay if people are in denial. That's how they're surviving. When they're ready, they're ready. And never ever push people out of their comfort zone when talking about this issue. It can leave them bare naked and raw and wounded. So defining those concepts, like I said earlier in the conversation, is very important. It was a very pivotal moment for me in my life. And this is where Lucy is the star of the conversation. Like I said earlier, Lucy's able to bridge her understanding of spirituality and her relationship to our Lord and our Creator, even though there's been this really hard time had around the missionary era here in Alaska and across the world, I guess. But I'm not able to do that quite yet. And I will be someday. And it'll be a really wonderful day, I think. But thank you to Lucy for being able to carry that message and still be there to provide that experience for people so that they can witness. So yeah, that's the end of mine. And I think Kathy is going to carry us through a really wonderful time here. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.